I beat Genshin Impact. A bold statement? Maybe. A very subjective statement? Definitely. But I did it. A bit over 4 months ago, I started playing Genshin Impact for the first time. And looking back at my first time experience, it is funny to see what points I was focusing on. Like, remember when I was wondering if the reason why the healing statues have a limit is because it is going to be a time gate later? Well, now I'm just wondering, why is it there? So yeah, 4 months later, I can say that after crawling through this very confusing hole, I came out on the other side with all the major story quests complete, a few reputations maxed out, quite a few 5-star characters on my account while staying free to play, and with the final floor of the Spiral Abyss cleared. And that's all while amassing 700 hours played. Throughout this journey, every time I talked about Genshin, people mentioned that I am overly positive about everything. But that's because it was all a setup for this moment. Because today we are not gonna talk about the amazing combat or the great events. We are going to talk about the garbage. And that goes for both the gameplay and the story. So strap up and get ready, because it's not often you can see me mad or disappointed. But today is gonna be one of those days. Just like it goes for every new Genshin player, my journey started with the story. By all means, the story is the true raw experience here. If Genshin does anything at all, it is telling stories for their characters. And that's for the better, or much worse. You see, previously you might have heard me saying that Genshin has some of the best stories told in gaming. Which is a statement I do believe is true. To give you some examples without any major spoilers, Raiden had some really strong points, Chasm has an excellent story with even better side quests, and Sumeru has some incredible hits, especially Nahida's quest, which is simply referred to as the Loop. That one was amazing. But while these big moments in the story are amazing, the way you get there can be painful. The best example is Inazuma. And here, just know that I am going to spoil the very beginning, which, to be honest, as you'll see, is gonna be totally fine. When you arrive in this beautiful region, in order to get to the great parts of the story, you have to run around and get a pass that lets you freely walk around. To get it, you first have to run around and help people deal with taxes for 3 hours. You then have to learn about the conflict between the local houses for the next 2 hours. Then things get a little bit more interesting as you learn about who Raiden is, before it gets to the part where you set up fireworks for 4 hours. Honestly, I know there were more chores in between these points, but my brain blocked out the memories because it's trying to protect me. What I know as a fact is that there was a total of 10 hours of setup before you got to the great part of the story of the region. Which wouldn't be an issue if the payoff was godly. But truth be told, specifically in Inazuma, the finale was simply really good. But there is no way this can justify 4 hours of setting up fireworks. I know they were important because they were used to distract the guards, but 4 hours? And that's not even counting the storyline of the entire Commission War. A massive war that is supposed to shape the future of this region. But due to technical limitations, the game only shows us a 5v5 battle. So yeah, sometimes the game can flop really heavily on the immersion, but that's not the point for now. The point is, sometimes the story can drag a lot, and that's for 2 reasons. First of all, Genshin relies on their gacha system, which means one thing. They have to promote their characters, which is how a lot of the time you end up with a lot of characters who are forced into a story. Not because they would necessarily enhance the story experience, but because it is a 5-star character. They have to give them as much spotlight as possible. In my opinion, Yoimiya is the perfect example here. Honestly, she is such a great character, but her story should have been her own character quest. There was no reason to force her into the Archon quest so brutally. And I do believe that might have soured the character for some people, which later got saved because she's a really good DPS. Thankfully, later, Hoyoverse realized that forcing characters into the story no matter what is not a great idea. And so for some of the new characters, instead of just forcing them into the main story, it seems like they either put them into events, which usually get their own stories, or for the 4 stars they give them the hangout quests. But then there is the other issue that Genshin has when it comes to its stories, and it's still a really big one. It is an issue that stayed in the game till this day. And that's the fact that no matter what conversation you are in, be it a big Archon quest or a lead up to what's happening in a region, in the vast majority of cases, they say a lot. And yet they say so little. I can't be the only one who noticed this, right? There are times when the dialogue just drags, which really sucks because this also happens during the big storylines which I really liked. Like, no matter what plot twist happens or what setup happens, everything has to be explained. Exposition is like 80% of the dialogue. What's crazy is that you can easily cut the dialogue in half. The story would stay, and in many cases, it might even be better, because it would actually help with the pacing. In movies and entertainment media in general, there is a golden saying that separates good and bad storytelling. Show, don't tell. A rule that tells the writers to show people what's going on and let them realize what's happening. By doing so, your viewers engage with the story from the side of the beholder. In Genshin, this immediately gets thrown out the window when Paimon appears on screen. And she explains every single tiny detail you might have missed with very long and complicated sentences. Like, yeah, Paimon actually does have some great scenes in the story, but this is not one of her stronger sides. And in case Paimon is not available, my favorite case of telling, not showing, is when the screen goes black and there is a text that pops up to tell you what's happening like it's a silent movie from the 1920s. What's strange is that it is obvious that the writers on Hoyoverse are good. They are using proper setups and payoffs. So, are they doing this just to give the game longer content? Well, unfortunately, things get a bit worse. Because you see, while the main story of Genshin literally has multiple days of raw, voice-acted conversations, it gets quite bad when you realize that all the side quests are not voice acted, but they still have the same kind of long conversations. So should you venture outside of the boundaries of the main story, get ready to read a lot. And I mean a lot. For many of you, this absolutely kills the pace, likely making you skip the dialogue and then look for videos on YouTube to tell you what happened. Or perhaps you don't care at all and you do nothing, leaving the poor cabbages sad because their history is quite cool. But you see, when it comes to the storytelling, there is even more things that we can mention, such as events. In my opinion, the FOMO is not as bad here. At least that's because the pros outweigh the cons. With all the events that come and go, the world actually feels alive. It simply wouldn't feel the same without them. But it's such garbage that actually important lore is locked behind these events. If it was just a side story, for example like what happened during the lunar celebrations, then sure, you can have most of the story be the day-to-day casual jobs of your characters, while also having some important lore in the middle of it. I'm totally fine with that. But when the event itself is a core part of setting up the world, that's absolute garbage. For example, I have no idea who this guy is. I went through all the stories and then he just randomly appeared in the middle of an event and I'm supposed to know him? In my chat, people kept telling me that he's actually gonna spoil a really important part of the story. And I'm just sitting here thinking, I just wanna play the game. Not to mention that even after I finished the event where he appeared, because I had no context for his story, if he spoiled anything, well, I missed it. So yeah, events are great, the way they tell stories is awesome. But please don't shove important lore into them. I missed 2 years worth of events and apparently some of that story was quite important. But you know what? Enough talking about the storytelling, let's move on. As I continued on my adventure through the story, the game finally introduced the Spiral Abyss to me. This is where I realized, I guess this is the end game. And so I set it up to be my goal to beat the final floor of the Spiral Abyss. At which point, my viewers were like, yeah, good luck with that. Unless you're a whale, see you in 3 years. So, being the insane person I am, to prove them that I don't have to pull for anything, I decided to do it as a free-to-play player. Which made me realize I had some planning to do. You see, it is true that at the beginning I got a bit lucky. My first ever pull gave me the look, whose gameplay I liked very much, so I decided to carry him with me to the end of the challenge. But the first banner that popped up when I was playing was for Hutao and Yelan, who are allegedly one of the best pyro carries in the game and one of the best hydro DPS supports. And I got them both within like 20 pulls of each other. And after them I also got Bennett and the Water Boy, which gave me a pretty good meta comp. So at that point, even though I was a free-to-play player, my account certainly didn't look like it. Which made me realize my free-to-play challenge is kinda stupid. Because what's the difference between whaling and just getting lucky? The difference is none, to be exact. But I still had to plan around my pulls. Because the Spiral Abyss requires 2 full teams to beat it. And even though my first team was really stacked, my second team was just random garbage. So if there was something I wanted to pull for, it would have to be for the second team. And yes, at that point I also realized that the gacha system is quite garbage. But I kinda accepted it for what it is, so at the end of the day, I'm kinda indifferent. It's like going into the liquor store and complaining that they have booze. Regardless, it didn't take long and I rounded up my second team, with my main carry there being Hutao. And even though this meant that I had 2 vape teams, I was happy. Until I hopped into the early floors to test out the team. And I was forced to see the truth. My eyes were forced open. Hutao sucks! It is true that she is really powerful and that she is one of the best DPSs. But my god, her gameplay sucks! To have optimal DPS, you have to charge attack and jump in the middle of the animation to interrupt it. Over and over and over. That's what you do the whole fight. People kept telling me, you know, it is what it is. To which I say, nay! That is not fun! I don't want to cancel animation my way to hell. And so, I threw Hutao into the garbage can and I benched her indefinitely. Yes, I am aware that I got lucky and I got her on my first attempt on the banner, but I don't like the gameplay. And if I don't like it, I'm not playing it. Of course, this decision started a bit of an argument. And this argument made me realize that the Genshin community splits into 2 camps. Those who follow the meta guides and micro-optimize their DPS, and those who actually have free will and they have fun with the tools Genshin gives them. And of course, one of these camps kept telling me that without Hutao, there is no way I can do Abyss 12. Now again, this entire time I firmly believe that you don't have to pull for anything. And you can just really play whatever you want. So, I decided to rise a very stupid but glorious middle finger. I went on the internet and searched for Genshin DPS tier lists, something no mortal should ever do. It was one thing to see Diluc lower on all the tier lists, that way he was perfect for me to play. But I also needed a carry DPS for the second team. Someone quite bad. Even better, someone who was designed to mainly be a support. Which is how my Candace carry challenge was born. To prove everyone that you should play what you wanna play, and to prove that anything works, I decided to beat the game with her. And just like that, my final 2 teams were locked in place. But there was one more issue. Leveling up the teams and farming artifacts was relatively simple. But I needed every help I could get, so I needed good weapons. My Diluc was using something usable, but Candace really needed some help. Which meant that for the first time, as a free-to-play player, I had to pull on the weapons banner. Thankfully, there was one that had one of the best DPS claymores in the game, but also a really good DPS spear. Perfect for my 2 carries. So I started pulling. And oh boy was it painful. Now I wouldn't say that the weapons banners are a scam. which is what most people say. They work on the same formula as pulling for characters, except instead of getting 5-star characters, you get 5-star weapons. In fact, the formulas are a bit more favorable towards the weapons. No, the reason why it sucks is because it is just not satisfying. Getting new weapons is simply not as transformative as getting new characters with entire new gameplay. And unfortunately, things really sucked for me because this was the first time my luck ran out. My main goal was to get a good Claymore for Diluc. So of course, after I kept off my pity, the first weapon I got was... painful, sure, but I went out into the world and farmed more gems. And the next stream I returned to pull some more. Only to cap off my pity again. And then... So yeah, it got bad. But with the pity system, at least this meant that the next weapon that would drop would definitely be the Claymore, right? Well, after a lot more farming, I kept off my pity again. But I didn't have enough to do my last 2 pulls. And this was on stream, and it was the last day of the banner. So I was forced into a dilemma. Earlier during my adventure, someone who's insane actually gifted my account 500 gems. So what I could do is just go out into the world and farm for 2 hours while giving people really bad stream content. Or I could give people some good content, tap into the gems, farm it off stream later, get the Claymore and continue with the story. So, that's what I did. And just to be fair, after the stream, I farmed the gems and I kept them on my account until the challenge was over. And literally on the next pull, I got my Claymore. So practically it is all as if I stayed free to play. Technically, however, I spent $2 to give people content. Do I care? No, it's a stupid challenge that gave me too many 5 stars anyway. So yeah, pulling for weapons is garbage, but more importantly, it's just not satisfying. Anyway, to get my team ready, there was one more thing that I have to do. Get artifacts. For the most case, that was easy, or so I thought. You see, yet again, I found a flaw. But this is a flaw that was very unique to me. Normal players will never face this. Up until this point, I never faced backseating before. Every time I played a game on stream before, I was fairly confident I knew more than my viewers. In general, statistically, I am above average at most games. But Genshin was my first time experience, so I was looking for tips from time to time. And holy shit, that was a bad idea. I now understand why backseating sucks and why people hate it so much. In my case, it actually started with the story. At the beginning, to a new player, Genshin actually spits out a lot of names. Not only are there just many different characters by default, but you also have 3 enemy factions, the story that was supposed to be spread out over 2 years just falls on you like an avalanche, and there are also multiple villains with different motives. But throughout all of this, even though I was constantly mixing up the factions, and I kept confusing who's on whose side, I still had fun because the story was interesting. I simply enjoyed it. And that was an issue, because I was consuming the story wrong. Apparently, I was ruining my own experience by rushing the story, even though you can't rush a story in this game. Unless you skip through dialogue, you actually just consume the story at the pace at which it is presented to you. Like, what do you think I'm supposed to do? Sit down at home and think about what I just witnessed after every quest? For me personally, it wasn't until Sumeru that things really clicked together. But for some people, that was too late and I was a lost cause. All while I was having a blast. So yeah, I got backseated on how to consume the story of a video game. But that's not the only kind of backseating that happened to me. Obviously, there were some people who corrected me on how to play when it comes to the combat. To a certain degree, it was helpful when people pointed out the basics to me. But later on, some people just shoved facts into my face, which crumbled at the first moment I opened up the internet. And it was proven to me that yet again, on average, I should be trusting my own instincts more. And you know, from time to time, I even like to troll the people who thought I was an absolute idiot. Is there a good one? Is there a good weapon for her? Or is there anything else that I can get that's better? The catch! What's the catch? Fishing. Can I just go and get it now? How long does that one take? It's long. 2 weeks. Clueless. Where do you buy it? Why 2 weeks? Can I just get it? Can I just not get it? Yeah, I can get it. Where? What? You can just buy it. You need these too? Yeah. You can just buy these. What are you on about? And so, with my team gathered up and my weapons ready, the day came to prove everyone wrong. I unlocked the final level of the Abyss, and I went in with my scuffed team. On that day, originally I just wanted to stream some stories and maybe try the Abyss for a bit. But instead, I ended up grinding the final floor of the Abyss for 5 hours. After all, this was my own stupid challenge that was preventing me from paying. It was the first time I faced that floor, and I have to say, I had an absolute blast. This was probably the most fun I have had in this game. It was like playing Dark Souls in Genshin, and it was awesome. It is true that around the 4-hour mark I took a break for 30 seconds and then I went right back in. And at the end, we faced Nut, a boss that is notorious for stalling time. Something that my low DPS team really didn't like. But at the end, I did it. It was pain. It was suffering. But with my Candace carry, I beat Spiral Abyss 12 with 0 stars and 8 seconds left on the timer. And I was happy with it. You see, this entire challenge was stupid to begin with. But since all my characters were fully leveled up, I realized that from that point on, the only difference between 0 stars and 9 stars are artifacts. That's the only way you can raise your power. And you know what artifacts are about? Luck. I could have prolonged my challenge to at least some stars, but from that point on, it's not that much of a skill issue anymore. It's just the case of having enough DPS to do it on time. And that pure lack of damage comes from the artifacts alone. Speaking of which, my 0-star Abyss achievement became a little bit more impressive when people checked out what artifacts I had, where more than half of them were at level 0 and my Dendro Traveler was in a wheelchair. Maybe that will give you some perspective. But yeah, what a stupid challenge that was. Don't do what I did. Speaking of artifacts, we are not done yet. Because throughout the entire journey, all of this got capped off with one more thing. The absolute king of triggering me. You see, as someone new, one could argue that I didn't have a lot of time to farm artifacts, which meant that there would be a lot of artifacts that were not perfect, but which were incredible for me given the fact that I was a new player, right? It would not be unthinkable to comprehend that I didn't have 2 years of time to farm artifacts. That when I got an artifact with crit rate and crit damage, it was good enough for me. That it could be one that I could use really well. No, in the eyes of all of you, it was all mid. All artifacts are either perfect or mid. A flower with crit rate and 80% roll into crit damage? That's mid. A great pyro artifact? Well, that's not part of the set, so it's mid. There were times when I was really happy that I got a really good artifact, only to look at my chat and see mid. And that just sucked. But not as much as trying to catch butterflies on my phone, that's far worse.